Thanks, Nada. Yeah, so as Nada said, my name's Mike. I lead a small kind of department within a big agency called SAMI Alliance, and we're called SAMI CX. We're essentially a customer experience a customer experience innovation function. And what we do is we help clients to improve their customer experience in innovative new ways, essentially. So what Nada asked me to talk to you about today, and this is we're going to talk specifically about kind of something we worked on together. And it's basically a technique for kind of mapping and understanding customer needs. So obviously, there's that kind of great quote from Steve Jobs when he was talking about how like you can't just take technology and try and like muscle it and crowbar it into an experience. You sort of have to start off by understanding what are the customer needs and what are you trying to design for. And very often, like when you get in situations where you're trying to improve a corporate experience, there isn't just like one person involved in it. There can be hundreds, if not thousands, of people sometimes involved in the kind of coming together and trying to improve the customer experience. And a lot of this are like chaos and the difficulties in the customers experiencing in the experience themselves are through simply like organizations not aligning on their understanding of customer needs. So task analysis and similar tasks, similar techniques like this really help galvanize organizations around what it is that the user's trying to do or the customer's trying to achieve with you. And that's what gives us that kind of like more coordinated kind of customer experience. So I'm going to talk to you about like why you do it, what it is, and where it's going from here, really. So there's lots of different, like people talk about it in different ways. There's different terms for it. I first came across this as a practice in like 1995 when I was studying interactive media. And back then it was called task analysis. But there's different like approaches that people have taken over the years. There's a brilliant researcher, Young, who refers to them as mental models. And a lot of this are thinking around innovation management and the innovator's dilemma from Clayton Christensen that kicked off a whole load of thinking around jobs to be done and jobs to be done mapping. So that's just the fundamental theory is that you kind of try and design for what customers need rather and what they're trying to achieve and then what the job that they're trying to do is. So there's lots of different like techniques around this, but the one that I've kind of focused on really is and the most comprehensive is Indy Young's mental models. But I've borrowed a lot from kind of quite traditional software design like task analysis. So if a lot of the techniques here are a little bit of a mishmash, but the most kind of comprehensive one I found is it's from Indy Young's book on mental models. So the basics of the technique are that it's basically like a sort of a time series, and there's steps on that time series, and you can use it. Let's say if you want to design a new experience for people who want to watch a film, for example, you might break down the steps that they take right from becoming aware of the latest releases, how they become interested in it. They might watch a trailer. They might talk about the film with friends. They might go on Rotten Tomatoes. Each one of these sort of activities and tasks that they perform are things that build up towards or make up their entire experience of watching a film in the cinema. And so that early upfront kind of discovery work where they're like finding out about this new film that's coming out, you might create that as like one phase, and you might label it discovery or awareness. And then the steps within that are check Rotten Tomatoes, check email, go onto the Reddit, film lovers forum, check it out on my Letterboxd or add it to my Letterboxd account. So all these different steps are like what happens in the ecosystem and how you kind of the steps that you go through. Now, the blue steps across the top what I try and do as much as possible is make those about what the user's trying to do. So where I mentioned like Letterboxd there, the user need around Letterboxd is like keeping track of your interests around films. And if you don't know what Letterboxd is, it's just a kind of social network around people rating films.
Mike,
And then the green,
Mike,
yes.
sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing your screen because we're still
Oh,
seeing
sorry.
the intro slide?
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see now it's in presentation mode. Perfect. Thank you.
Is it actually, is it moving when I do this? Is it moving?
We are at the what task analysis. No, it's not moved to
Oh,
another slide yet.
okay, I just need to change
Green, yeah,
something because it's like every time I, sorry everyone, let me just try and share again. Because
sure,
every time I share it's into presentation mode, it pauses the sharing. It's annoying. Okay, just bear with me a second. Apologies.
sure.
Okay, stop sharing. I'm just going to share my entire screen because that I think that gives me a bit more control. Okay, can you see like a diagram of a task model now?
Yes, at the moment we can see that. Can you go to the next slide so we can see step one? Yeah, it's changing now. Mental models. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. Thanks, Nada. So you get the phases across the top. So those are the kind of discovery, kind of awareness, discovery, etc. And then the steps might be look out for new film, learn about film, and then the blue steps are things you're trying to address for yourself. So some people call that the value steps. So these are agnostic of like the solutions that are out there. So let's say when we talk about like letterbox, that's a green sticker or tab, and the green steps are things that people are, well, innovations that are already out there that are kind of helping you achieve your need. So the blue steps are things that you're trying to achieve for yourself. So like keep track of movies, for example, and then the green bits are like letterboxed. And what this allows you to do is it, it puts all your research into one place. So all the blue steps are like needs, and then the green steps are like things that are already out there. So what it allows you to literally see that there are gaps to innovate around. So step 4, for example, there's some needs there that we've identified, but they're not being served. So that's a real like opportunity for innovation. And you might do some work around like are the needs that are in sort of step 3 serviced well enough by that innovation that's there already in step 3. But there's all sorts of other reasons why you do this. Like the biggest thing is like when you have a shared understanding of your customer's experience and their needs, it's a lot more like galvanizing. So if you sometimes when you work in like startups, a lot of startups sort of mentality is driven by this kind of, you know, whatever the product owner wants to do is based on what they're wanting to do, and it's all kind of in their head. And it's a great way. This is a great way of like getting it out onto a visualization and them expressing what they think the solution is. And then when you do start to do your research, you can uncover things that people in those sorts of leadership positions they may not have like realized is there. So it's a great way of like galvanizing teams, you know, if you're in a startup and you want to kind of get people to think more broadly. And then for larger organizations, it can be really, you know, because you've got so many people sometimes like working on the same sort of service. It can often be like groups of people who think, we need to spend all our resources on this part of the customer journey, and you might have another group who want to spend their time and energy on something completely different, and that kind of pulling in different directions. You know, people will often talk about the problems of like silos in delivering quality customer experiences. And again, this kind of really helps like pull down those silos and gets all those different teams talking together. So yeah, just wanted to give a shout out to Indy Young's book. I this is my favorite book on this sort of topic, just because she goes into such a lot of detail about how to do um, the sort of mapping that's needed and how to conduct the research. It's really, really helpful. And I think that's, sorry, is there a question there?
Sorry, yeah, to interrupt you. How do you want to take the questions? Do you want me to shout it out as we go along, or do you want to do
Yeah,
it?
that'd be great. That'd be great, actually. Yeah, that's fine.
So what we have a question here. What ways do you find out the solution or is already there
Mm,
to achieve a task?
yeah,
When do you feel comfortable that you have included all the solutions already out there and
yeah,
not
yeah.
missed any?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think I've probably talked a bit too much about like what it is, and actually less about the method. And I'll go into a bit more detail about how you conduct the interviews to find this stuff out. But really, it's a set of interviews that you conduct with participants. So you'd recruit a bunch of people who are, typically undertaking that task, say going to the cinema, for example, and you'd get them to tell you their story about last time they visited the cinema and everything they did along the way. And that gives you their needs, like what they were trying to do for themselves in those different phases, and B, it gives you some like solutions that they're already using that are out there. But hopefully I'll answer your question as I'm going, because yeah, there's a bit more to talk about on both those two topics.
Thank you.
Um, so what I'm going to talk to you through is like a sort of case study of how we approached this for a big bank a few years ago, and this was mainly because Nada actually worked on this with me as part of the team, so I think serves quite a good example. So this is Jim. He's the product owner for let's call it a help me understand a transaction on my bank account. So people spend a lot of time looking in their bank account and their statement, their transactions, and trying to understand like what is it that I spend that on? Was that me? And this was really with it was the impetus around it was trying to like reduce fraud. Basically, sometimes you get transactions in your account that you're not responsible for, and it might have been somebody else. But what we discovered was there's quite a lot of things that people forget about on their transactions that they've carried out themselves. They just don't recognize it very well. So we felt there was like quite a lot of potential innovation around fraud reduction, helping people spot their transactions and understand them more easily. And so I this was a long time ago actually, and even probably before we properly used Teams, and like everyone uses video conferencing now, but I think 10 years ago people were using it a lot less. Although it'd be useful to talk to you about how we did it 10 years ago and now how we're thinking about doing this same work kind of with more modern research techniques. But I rented this car and we went around to lots of different places around Manchester to conduct these interviews in people's homes, because we felt it was quite important to see people's environment and understand how they kind of the environment that they're in their context. And in fact, part of taking the product owner along with me for this was just getting them to have this like instinctive like idea and instinctive context around like when he's kind of making decisions in 6 months, 8 months, a year's time about the product, he'll probably think back to when he was visiting people in their homes and understanding their like how they approach things. And the way that we recruited all these participants was really simple. It was just there's all these different recruitment agencies you can employ who have networks of people around the country who can find people for a fee, basically. So they're companies like I thought, people for research, left field, there's lots of them. And you just give them a brief and they'll find people on it for a certain date and they'll organize the payments with them. And usually you can give them like 40 or 50 pounds for an interview. So yeah, that's how we get all these people. So there's people like Clive, so visited him in his home. He like all these participants were very kind enough to let us take pictures, and as long as they're not sort of identifiable in the pictures. Dambisa, Sid. So the reason why we sort of took this approach, well, I'll talk to you a bit about the once we've done the interview. So actually, maybe I'll step back and just talk about the interview. With the interview, it's very much like we're trying to get them to tell us a story of last time they did this particular thing. So going back to our example with the going to the cinema and watching the latest film, we'll want to recruit for people who can remember the last time they went to go see a film, and we'll usually have a special screener questionnaire that we'll send out. That will say, have you been to the cinema twice in the last 2 months? And that's a good indicator of someone who we'd categorize as like a film lover, let's say. And so once we have these conversations with film lovers, we'll ask them to go into detail about like what's their process. And usually what they'll tend to do is they'll say, oh, I hear about a new film. I'll like look it up online, watch the trailer, decide if I want to go, and then I'll book the ticket and then I'll go. And then I might like read up on a forum after that. And they'll tell us that story very, very quickly. And then we'll say, okay, let's just take it. We've got all those steps and we'll go back. And then we go into like real finite detail, real silly detail on each step. We'll say, okay, what kind of forums did you use to find out about the film or like learn more about the film? And they'll usually, if they're interested in this topic, they'll then start to give you loads of really, really rich insight. So once we'll do like 8 interviews like that, we'll collect that the story of the whole kind of process, and we'll transcribe everything. And years ago there was only just like new services coming onto the market that would transcribe text for you. So we'd record the audio, then we'd transcribe the text, and then we'd take out any personally identifiable information. And then this picture here is like the team that were working on this service. We'd like get them all together and we'd we'd each take a transcript or a couple of transcripts per person, or like give them markers and let them like highlight different areas or circle the areas where there's like verb noun phrases where the user has said that they did something. So they might say, in the transcript, took the number 58 bus to the high street and walked down the road to the Everyman cinema. And we'd pick out every single bit, like the taking the bus, walking along the street, choosing the popcorn, etc. So each one of those little actions was an important action. So as a team, we would highlight all those different actions. And we take blue post-it notes and come together, and for every one of those highlighted areas, they'd write it onto a post-it and then stick it on a wall. Let's just ignore that for now. Once we've stuck all the blue post-its on the wall, we'd kind of group them together into areas that felt kind of like they were in the same sort of bucket. So let's say one person said, "Oh, I chose my popcorn," and another person said, "Oh, I got a Coke and a packet of Revels," and we'd maybe group that into like refreshments, let's say, and we then change that task to a higher level task, which is buy refreshments. And so you can see what we're trying to do is like get every single need that happens or thing the user wants to do, because essentially, like, if you let's say when someone says I'm buying refreshments, and when we're actually conducting the conversation, we might say, "Oh, why do you need refreshments? Like, why not just go in and sit there?" And they might say, "Oh, well, I don't. The film might be boring, or it's got a sentimental attachment. Like I always have to have a hot dog before I go in or afterwards, or I always have to do this because of X, Y, and Z. I always have to have something very quiet. I would never eat Revels because that's a noisy sweet, and I don't want people shushing me in the cinema." And each of these points kind of points out a need. Like it says, well, the cinema has to be quiet for people. Um, the the cinema has to be quiet for people. It has to, people get nervous about about being shushed by each other. And once you have all these kind of in place, that allows you to work out like, oh, well, maybe it's really important to have the cinema soundproofed, and you might have special sections that are completely soundproofed, and then you might think about how you can pipe this sound into individual chairs so that you get a much more personal experience, but still have the big screen. So it allows you to like think more like it's a much richer way of like generating ideas because they're based purely on the experiences of the individuals that you're serving rather than your own experiences. Because what people tend to do in kind of brainstorms is think about their own kind of past experiences. But what we really want to do in this kind of innovation process is get the team thinking about the customer in more detail. Yeah, so it used to get quite pretty messy. This was way before we had Mural and tools like that, and we do it with stickies. So each of the blue points was like the tasks that we identified, and then the yellow point, the I think the orange ones we did some affinity mapping, and they were identified as the big sort of phases, steps in the process. Again, sorry, I'm talking about cinemas, but this was actually more recognizing transactions in your bank statement. And once we'd got that out on the wall, we'd take a picture, and then we'd get that into like a drawing package, like used to be Visio, but sometimes we'd use Illustrator, but now we'd use Mural, something like that. And then we might build it up into like a picture like this, where you got the phases across the top, and then you break down the tasks into the sort of the around the grey boxes, and also that the motivations around it as well. So we eventually ended up with this, which I'll just zoom into. So it looks a bit different from the Indie Young type of mental models. So this is more, I guess, more of a, if you wanted to search for, if you want to find out more about this type of diagram, it's called a task model. If you type in task model and CX, it should come up with some articles by CX Partners that goes into this in a bit more detail. So from all that kind of, jiggling around with post-its and like tracking what conversations were, we got together basically all the steps, the value steps to the process. So you might like see a transaction you don't recognize, do a bit of like discovery work around like why don't I recognize this? You might try and diagnose the problem for yourself, and you might kind of, these are things that people said they would do. Like people even, this is we had a lot of people who were not using digital at the time, and they literally, if they received a letter, a statement, paper statement, they would highlight it and then take that paper statement to the bank and say, "Oh, what can you explain this to me, please?" You might kind of explore, like you might look up the text of the transaction on Google, for example. You might read through the terms and conditions of that particular retailer, because you might feel like the retailers charged you, or you recognize the retailer, but you don't know why they've charged you, and then you need to look up, like, is this a recurring payment or something? And there's lots of like feelings that people have at this point. Like they might feel like naive and kind of curious, anxious about what's happening, and then some people might feel a bit silly about what that they don't recognize what's something on their bank statement. So each of these steps helps you understand like what were they trying to do, and how do they feel about it. Yeah, and you can lay this out much like this here. It doesn't matter too much how you lay it out. We just wanted to convey the feelings that people had, because we were at the time we were working with um, telephony staff, and we were developing training around like how to talk to people when they're confused over the phone. So it mattered a bit more to convey the emotional aspects of it. But with the Indie Young sort of method, it's a bit more just about the steps, categorizing the steps, and then what exists out there already. So yeah, so that is task analysis. I've called it task analysis, but it's some people call it task modeling, some people call it jobs to be done mapping. It's all just laying out the things that people do and why they do them, but basing that on actual conversations that users have had. And the worst thing you can do with this kind of like map is to just make it up from your own experiences. Like we try as much as possible to base these on ethnographic data, so conversations that we've had, for primary conversations that we've had with users. But I'll talk to you in a minute about how you can do that through secondary resources, which can make it a little bit cheaper. Yeah, I just want to say as well, once we've done all that kind of mapping and affinity mapping around the different needs, we sort of noticed there was very different traits that people had in the sort of, I think we spoke to 12 different people, and we sort of did some another activity that was more around like what are the adjectives you'd use to describe the individuals, and then we did some affinity mapping with those, and they helped us work out like patterns of behavior of different types of users. We then developed some segmentation around that. So we had Margaret was, when she would call the contact center, she'd have very, very high expectations about how her call was going to be serviced. And this was based on like two of the people who we spoke with. And they were this type of customer would usually ring up and kind of feel like it's the bank's kind of problem to solve right from the very beginning of the conversation. So that the call handlers would often be like on the back foot, and this would be someone who like often be like come across as quite entitled, but yeah, high expectations. And then Kasia, she would often be in this sort of situation because she was in situations where she'd be kind of manipulated by other people, sometimes within her family. So this is someone with an example. It's sort of an experience of like financial abuse, really. Steve was like very security naive. He would just, not really care about where his cards were at any time of the day, and his kids might just use them for whatever they fancied using them for. Joe, in a similar sense, he was very sort of distracted and absent-minded. These weren't real people. These were just like the patterns that we identified in the conversations. Gareth was very impulsive and deal-seeking. The average Gareth would just find themselves trying to buy, Chinese made football shirts at like 3 a.m. after he's come back from the pub. Yeah. And then Priya, much like the first participant, she was more like somebody who really, really knows their rights and would would understand that, if she paid for something on a credit card, she knows a regulation like Section 75 that needs to be adhered to for this for the way that she's kind of serviced, and she's basically looking for a to recover her cost base, recover her spending. Now that was how we used to do it, kind of, I suppose, about 10 years ago, and it was all quite sort of manual, and it was all very. It was I used to find it quite a challenge to convince stakeholders and product owners and product managers to set aside budget to do this sort of work, because it was, yeah, it took a lot of the team's time, took a lot of participant time. So you'd have to recruit participants, which itself has a cost. So the whole thing can be quite expensive activity. You can do it if you're in a startup. You can do it all very like, or well, startup or like academia. You can do this with friends and family, or like people who know people. If you're working for a charity, there's ways you can do this like on a shoestring, but it can take up a lot of time and energy. So over the years, I've really, this is a technique that I've found very, very valuable, but I've also been trying to find ways that it's like we can make it cheaper, so that it can be used more basically. So one way that we sort of approach this now, and I now work for a company that has some incredible data scientists and analysts, and also access to social media listening tools like Sprinkler, for example. And what you can do now is you can use tools like Sprinkler, which is basically like a social listening platform. You can use it to read Reddit, X, Twitter, and other social media platforms for conversations around whatever it is you're interested in. So if you were designing a service around, well, let's stay with the cinema. You might search for things around cinema and like latest films, blockbusters, box office, things like that. And you would then be able to like filter down to all that work that I mentioned, like writing things on blue stickies. You can basically do that with algorithms now, and you can do the affinity mapping automatically as well. And this is like a bit experimental at the moment, but my hope is that because of the way that large language models and AI is now sort of come into the fore, that we'll be able to do this sort of thing a lot quicker and cheaper. We have like a kind of a proprietary intelligence suite that helps us kind of clean all the data that we get from Sprinkler. We do this sort of thing for Microsoft and Diageo. Yeah, so I personally, I don't fully understand how we do all the cluster analysis, but I'm learning, and I'm trying to use more of these sorts of techniques with task analysis. Yeah, that's it. That's kind of the technique itself and how it sort of benefits service design and customer experience design, and then where we're going with it in the future. And I don't think that future is very far off. It's kind of we're doing it already, and in fact, Indy Young, she kind of like positions her work as data science with listening. I think there's ways that we can use data science, machine learning, and large language models to generate this kind of thing, and then supplement it with a bit more kind of insight. So I'm excited where this can take us, but it's a bit of an experimental approach at the moment. So yeah, that's task analysis. Any questions?
Thank you, Mike. Thanks very much for taking us through that. Yes, and probably we should have called it Jobs to be Done webinar. Would have enticed a few more people on it. But the key question you've already answered. It was in the Q&A. So I'll open the opportunity for people to ask more questions. If you have any other questions that you would like Mike to answer, please put it in the Q&A and we will do our best to answer it. And it's giving people a few seconds just to see whether there are any other questions. So the person who asked, maybe I will start with one question to the person who asked, because it says anonymous, so I don't know who it was. What ways do you find the solutions whether the solutions are already there, and what are the tasks that the people want to achieve? Now, have we answered your question? Did you get the answers?
I don't know if is the chat actually working now?
The Q&A is working, but not the chat. So you can put it in Q&A, and we can, I mean, from obviously what I got away from that is that while they're answering, if they're answering it, yes, I got the answers. Thank you. Yes, so exactly. So I think there are three parts to it, I guess. The interviews where, first of all, you need to engage the right agency or know who you want to identify your target segment, give the qualifying questionnaire to the agency. So the agency finds the right people for you. They ask the questionnaire to make sure that the right people for you, and then you go and interview them, whether it's face-to-face in the place of work or at home, or we can use some new technology, and then extract those interview questions, and then come and extract from those transcripts what are the things they were doing, and also whether you have solutions that meet that, whether they undermet or unserved needs that they had, and also the fact that we went a bit further after, yes, clustering or affinity grouping and coming up with clusters, and then adding the feelings or based on the tone of the responses, and say, okay, how they were feeling about the situation they were in to help for the particular case that we were working on. So that was that. And then also now with the advances in technology, having Sprinkler to sort of listen to what's going on in the social media, to not necessarily potentially to replace that research and finding, but to give you another dimension, because you get that vast amount of data that is out there. You can analyze it and then get some insight from that. And depending on the job that you want to do, that may be enough for you. Or you may want to do still go and do some interviews with people as well.
Yeah.
So
very perfect summary.
yeah, thank you very much for that, Mike. That would be good.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Mike. Anything else you want to do to say just before we close?
No, it's all good. Thank you for having me, Nada.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Obviously, we've recorded it, and the recording will be available shortly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.